One of the piers in Hong Kong, the mother of all Asia's metropolises and megacities. Hong Kong was the blueprint for a wave of urbanization that began here and in Tokyo in the 1960s. Millions of people streamed into the cities, forcing them to grow upwards. That was the start of something that all Asian metropolises have in common: extremely high densities and questions about order and balance in cities that have shot up at a spectacular rate. Separated from Hong Kong by only a river and a metro line is Shenzhen, the city with the highest per capita income in China. Up until the early 1980s, Shenzhen was a small town with a population that just topped 30,000. Then it was declared a special economic zone. As the little sister of Big Hong Kong, it grew to more than 10 million in a very short space of time. Shenzhen long ago overtook Hong Kong in terms of population. Together, the two cities form one of China's major economic hubs. Hence the megacities' continuing relentless growth. But expansion demands order and structure, and new spaces where people can meet. For cities that have no time for organic growth, cultural buildings are seen as the answer, which is why so many museums and cultural centres are currently under construction in China. One of them was designed by architect Pai Zhu.
The Design Museum was actually here first. When I started work on my design, this planning area was being developed with commercial buildings on a very large scale. And against that backdrop, a question presented itself. How can a cultural building, a place where people come together, stand out from mere commercial buildings? I attempted to answer that question.
All over the world, breathtaking cultural buildings enhance the prestige and value of their surroundings. But what is different in China is that the museums are created first. They lack a context. The new city around them is still growing, so they are actually built to shape public life.
I chose two motifs to get as many people as possible to come and visit the museum. One is contrast, the other integration. As we can see, the shape of the building is very natural, which makes it just about perfect in my view. These are the external contours. The internal space is intended to suggest endless continuity, as if it had no boundaries. So when you stand inside on the ramp, you feel as if you are floating in the air.
The vacuum in which many architects in China work sometimes gives rise to radical designs. Designs that raise questions about tradition and philosophy and make for far more than just spectacular or interesting looking buildings.
Viewed from outside, the museum is a self-contained, three-dimensional object. But when you step inside, you get a sense of boundless space. The curvature of the building is perfect. Like in the work of the American artist James Turrell, his installations are attempts to create endless space, to confuse and enhance normal human perception. Museum walls normally form a white background for artworks. And the conventional way to display industrial artworks, such as cars, is also on flat ground. Here, though, cars can float in space. People as well. They also float in space. Because the space has no dimensions and no boundaries, they lose the sense of walking on a floor and feel as if they are floating on air. This concept flies in the face of normal museum design, where walls are white and art is viewed against them. In here, it's as if the cars on show have wings and can fly, and people move around like fish in water.
The greatest challenge for Chinese architects seems to be that they work in a vacuum. They do not have the context of an urban landscape that is developed organically. In Pai Zhu's concept, that absence fuels audacity. He meditates on space and sense of space, and on identity and inspiration in the 21st century. His museum is intended to be a meeting point for people who will come here in the future, people for whom he seeks a balance that is new and different. That takes audacity and great skill.
We achieve integrity through the use of diffusely reflecting materials. For example, materials that reflect only the shadows of people approaching the building. Changes in the sky, in the color and intensity of light during the course of the day, and also changes in the surroundings are visible on the building. I call such buildings lost or invisible buildings. And I think the idea of making oneself invisible is rooted in Chinese culture. With those two motifs, we achieve harmony in the building. It's sometimes conspicuous and sometimes almost invisible.
It's an awesome design. Its contours suggestive, sensual, and at the same time meditative. Not a UFO, more a thought, an idea, that people in this new world will find harmony, that they will believe it and feel secure and confident when they see these contours and experience the space inside. Pai Zhu's design museum is built for the future and at the same time builds a bridge to a spirituality rooted in Chinese tradition.
If we want architecture to embrace both modern and traditional Chinese culture, we need to place less emphasis on material and form, and much more on the underlying idea and spirit of the design. Emptiness is not empty, and zero is infinitely large. These are interesting concepts based on Chinese culture.
Shenzhen at night is like a dramatic stage production, an illuminated opera, a towering backdrop for life in a community that can barely be seen as a collection of individuals. Before long, perhaps, Pai Zhu's museum will become a place people make for to find peace and relaxation and to experience balance without losing touch with the 21st century. In the northeast of China, not far from the border with the former Soviet Union and also on the coast, is another city growing at a phenomenal rate, Dalian. Forests of skyscrapers stretch towards the sea, away from the old town centre. References to Dalian as a port date back as far as the 6th century, and for a long time it was a base for the Northern Fleet. The layout of the city, as so often in China, is based on a rectangular grid like Manhattan. Here in Dalian, development is not so dense but very uniform, so the place feels like a city with no beginning and no end. To give the city a face, a large and very eye-catching cultural centre was commissioned. It was designed by internationally noted architect Wolf Prix. The site selected, between the sea and the new city, predestined the building to become a landmark and a new centre.
Dalian is laid out like this. The city is here,
Die hat zwei
with two converging road axes running straight to the existing port area.
das bestehende Hafengelände.
There were already plans in place for further development of this area.
Weitergeplant gehabt und wir haben in Verlängerung dieser beiden
We designed the building as an extension of these two axes.
das im Prinzip so funktioniert.
In the middle, we have the opera house, with the conference rooms arranged around it. There's also a ramp running through this space, combining the conference centers with the opera. So there's direct access to the auditorium on this level.
Von dieser Ebene in die Ränge der Oper gehen.
Wolf Prix's office, Corp Himmelblau, won international acclaim for its design for the BMW Brand Experience Center in Munich. Since then, it has realized projects worldwide, many of them with one thing in common. They're not just spectacular buildings, but cities within cities. Here, a kind of vertical marketplace surrounded by structures and open spaces, protected by a shell reminiscent of old city walls.
Das ist ein Konferenzzentrum nicht mit einem Konferenzsaal, sondern
It's a conference center that doesn't have a conference room at its heart, but an opera house.
reihen sich die Konferenzsäle
The conference rooms are arranged around the central opera house like a string of pearls.
Gebäude, sondern mein Gott, vielleicht ist es wie eine
But it's not a building with a hierarchical structure. It's like a medieval town with lots of small and large open spaces,
große Plätze gibt und wo man auch in die
where it's also possible to move in the third dimension, to ascend to the opera, or cross the room on bridges.
den Raum queren kann.
The spatial experience in this cosmos is like nothing ever experienced before. The visitor moves in a new and unparalleled world of his own. The space is dynamic. Perception changes depending on the observer's position. Everything is in motion. Maybe that's what the client wanted for this ever-active city, a quiet place of constant turmoil.
Manchmal blockieren wir die
Sometimes we block out the view, sometimes we reveal it. Like here, for example, in this large lobby, which is the size of 4 football pitches. The building as a whole accommodates up to 8,000 people, which is a small town. In China, I suppose it's a village, but in Austria, where I come from, it's a medium-sized town.
Asia's new cities are a major challenge for all architects. There is no urban structure that has grown and developed over centuries, no context that needs to be considered. But that vacuous space is also a great opportunity. It means the architect is crucially involved in creating the structures that are needed for a 21st century city.
One of the striking features of all our buildings is that they incorporate bridges, connectors, spatial elements that allow people to see the bigger picture.
The centre offers a wide range of facilities, the opera house and lots of assembly rooms. A place for large numbers of people and lots of different types of gatherings. There are points and places from which more can be seen than from others, but it's very important to note that there's not a single point from which everything can be seen. The centre does not radiate power or prestige, it radiates community spirit.
Man kann aber auch hier rundherum gehen.
But you can walk all the way around here as well. That's a key feature. You can move around freely. You are not guided along particular routes.
Was ganz wichtig ist, wenn das Gebäude ist und das die Oper ist.
And what's very important, the conference rooms around the opera project beyond the building site.
Die Baulinie hinausragen.
They mold the skin of the center.
des Zentrums moduliert. Also die Räume
The rooms, as it were, stretched the skin of the exterior.
die Haut des Äußeren. Und von hier aus sieht man
And from here you can see the sea. It's a wonderful sight. When we were awarded the contract, the chance to design a building for this site was a very exciting prospect.
Gestalt.
Like Shenzhen, Dalian became a special economic zone in 1984 and now has a population of more than 6 million. One of the purposes of this place is to make a name for the city in the world.
In the ever more anonymous network of a city,
Netz einer Stadt sind
iconic buildings are immensely important.
identifizierbare Gebäude unendlich wichtig.
They are vital for emotional ownership of the space that we create.
Wir schaffen.
Ningbo is also a fast-growing city. Its name translates as serene waves. Ningbo is situated in the south of the densely populated Yangtze River Delta. The city has always been a coastal town and port on the East China Sea. Its origins date back 7,000 years, so the idea of giving it a history museum was entirely logical. The man invited to design it was Hangzhou-based architect Wang Shu.
The design of the Ningbo Museum is very much a response to the surroundings. The building is in the middle of a new municipal area, directly adjacent to the government building. A master plan was produced for this area. It's known as Mini Manhattan because it attempts to imitate the urban structure of New York. Hence, the interest in a history museum. But how do you go about creating one?
The site of the museum is a shock to the system. It could be taken for a fortress, a medieval storehouse, a bunker. At first glance, it seems like an outrageous design for a modern city. It takes courage to create a building like this in a country obsessed with the future.
The idea was to create something to challenge the dominance of the skyscrapers. The focus was more on landscape and nature, which is why the building is very low. Preference is normally given to gleaming construction materials like glass and metal. But I deliberately chose to build a very dark, non-reflective structure. I think that is more consistent with my approach and my understanding of Chinese tradition.
When Wang Shu was awarded the Pritzker Prize, which is a kind of Nobel Prize for architects, this monumental museum was specifically mentioned in the jury citation. The building is so incredibly at odds with a frenzied metropolis that the entire project seems like a manifesto, like a vehement cry not to abandon tradition but to try, in the 21st century, to reconnect with history.
We basically wanted to use only reclaimed construction materials, which immediately upset the supervising government officials. They didn't get it. The new city was supposed to look like a miniature Manhattan, that is, modern and futuristic. So they couldn't understand why I wanted to use dirty old materials. What was I thinking? I explained to them that the museum would not just house a collection of historical and cultural artifacts. It would also be a storehouse of memories and experience. I think harmony with history and tradition is vitally important. Let me give you an example. On TV, we often see dramas where someone loses their memory. After that, everything goes wrong. Life spins out of control. If we look at Chinese cities, we see that nearly all of them have lost their memory. It's a dreadful situation. And that's why we talk about history and tradition. They are essential for daily life.
Respecting the old and preserving it, even in the fabric of the building, the idea is unknown in China. The fear that China's ancient history might survive only in legends and not in buildings runs like a red thread through all of Wangshu's architecture.
I see my work as transposing traditional techniques to modern buildings. Because of technological limitations, traditional buildings can normally only reach a height of about 6 meters. But in the Ningbo Museum, we reach 24 meters. That's the challenge. Drawing on traditional experience while at the same time meeting the technical requirements of a modern building, taking traditional experience to a new level.
The museum presents history, scenes from past dynasties, costumes, objects. They all appear insignificant compared to the forcefulness of the building, which seems to want to bring all its power to bear and intervene in the present course of Chinese history. Ningbo has a lot of buildings that are the work of Wangshu and have made him an international celebrity. In the old port, once just a small town, he built an art museum that blends in with the surroundings. At first glance, it looks like a very long warehouse.
I felt we had to incorporate the old port in the design. I hoped that the museum would keep memories of the old port alive. In the past, people took the ferry from there to Shanghai and to Putuo, one of the sacred mountains. And that's why my design has 2 bridges, as if it was still possible to depart from that point. I want to keep that memory alive. I don't want my museum to obscure it.
The design of the art museum is very simple. The vertical structure of wooden panels and steel columns counterbalances the horizontal lines of the long building. Indoors, there are not many surprises either. It is a simple museum building, no more than a platform for exhibitions, and the resemblance to a warehouse is obvious. But that's where the veiled suggestive power of the building lies. Even in this new age of global economic prominence, it says there is still room for simplicity and modesty, for a quiet architecture that signals the future.
I am very interested in cities that do not block the view of the broad horizon. Our new cities are full of skyscrapers that obstruct lines of sight. Paris is a magnificent place. Even today, you can recognize the topographical differences of the city. In my designs, I want to achieve the same, to allow people to see a broad horizon. That's why I often build low, and why the horizontal line is dominant in my work.
Wangshu's designs are often not recognized straight away. They initially seem quite discreet. At second glance, however, they make a stronger impact. Their simplicity and proportion catch the eye. All his buildings have a kind of inner power, an aura. They're like physical manifestations of a desire to be different, to be at variance with the times, to show that there is an alternative. Not folksy sentimentality, but a different way forward in a country where new cities will continue to grow for a long time to come.
Chinese tradition is still alive. It's not an abstract concept. When a Qing dynasty building is demolished, bricks from the Tang dynasty may well be found under it, which tells us, quite literally, that as time goes by, history piles up. And that's life.
Cultural buildings are always public places. In China, in these times of rapid urbanization, they have a special role to play, to embody and incorporate what this urban society still lacks: balance between new ideas and memory.